Hello again. This is Solving Basketball. Today's guest, Jesse Newell, is the Kansas Jayhawks beat reporter for the Kansas City Star. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk, Jesse.
Hey, Jordan, I appreciate it. And I did want to tell you one of the cool thrills a couple years ago when you were doing your newsletter is when you mentioned me in there and had some of my articles in there. So I thought that was pretty cool. I know that was going out to some coaches and some people in the industry, but it was awesome to see that you were reading some of my work even when you had no connection to me as the New Mexico State video coordinator.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we'll be talking about some of those articles, and that's almost the twist a little bit for this podcast. My first question for you, first question for everybody is, if we went to a gym right now and I walked under the basket to rebound for you and you went to the free throw line, how many free throws would you make out of 100?
Well, I will tell you, I was worried about this question because every time I've listened to your podcast before and heard the guests, I thought, I wonder what my number is. And when you used to ask me to come on, I thought, oh man, this is bad because, for one, I know that me and Zach are going to be in a race for lowest honors on this podcast whenever however long it goes. So actually yesterday, after I got some pizza here in Lawrence, I made my way over to the rec center. I grabbed the only regulation size basketball they had in the little cart, and I shot 100 free throws up and was worried about what it might look like at the very end. But after a very, very slow start, I can tell you that I hit 53 out of 100 free throws rebounding for myself. So I can't give you the exact number that I would hit with you rebounding for me, but I can tell you that yesterday, completely cold with jeans on, I made 53 out of 100, and I'm going to be honest with you, I am not disappointed in that number.
I feel like we got to, with the jeans and rebounding for yourself, that's at least plus 10, I would say. At least plus 10.
I don't know. The way I started out, Jordan, I mean, 53 is probably about my ceiling. I started out 3 of 10, 3 of 10, 3 of 10. So it took a completely hot stretch for me late. I was on a heater there late to get to 53.
Well, I appreciate the sample test for the podcast. That's pretty cool. It's funny. It's become a way for me to tell if the guests listen or not. So I really appreciate you checking out the other episodes.
Yeah, for sure. Well, like I said, if Army makes the Final Four and Kansas makes the Final Four, I'm happy to set up a free throw shooting contest between me and Zach. So that would be, I think, a great one-on-one battle.
What is basketball? What is this basketball? Is that basketball? What is basketball?
So I'm curious, now that we know about your free throw shooting prowess, what is your basketball background in general?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's sort of, I kind of repeat maybe what Zach said earlier, which is you want to be seen as credible and you want to have people believe in what you say, but I'll be open and honest about my background with basketball, which is it's not that much. I mean, the last really organized basketball I played was in 8th grade, and that's because I was the trainer for the middle school basketball team and my dad was the coach. So basically I was the walk-on of the 8th grade team because my dad would coach the team back in Emporia, Kansas. And maybe to add a little bit more onto that, I attended a scholarship hall at Kansas, which I know a lot of people affectionately call the nerd halls, and I was not on the competitive nerd hall team where there's 45 guys. I was on the non-competitive, we called it just chillin' basketball team. So if you're in a hall with a bunch of smart dudes and you're not on the top team, I think that lets you know my basketball skill there. But having said that, I think part of what I like to do is that maybe I do come from a different perspective. Maybe I see the game in a different way than the people who are just X's and O's based and have been in the game in that way. And, a lot of that comes from the sources you would think, Ken Pomeroy, kenpom.com, looking at some synergy stuff. And part of what's exciting for me, too, is just trying to learn the game as much as I can. And I know, Jordan, with your site and what you do on there, and then cleaning the glass from Ben Falk and b-ball breakdown, and certain things you can get out there. You can buy coaches DVDs, which I've done in the past. Buy some Bill Self DVDs to kind of see what he does. I try to learn as much as I can, and that's sort of I think what continues to get me interested in what basketball is, because I feel like I want to try to learn something new about the game every single day, while also coming at this from a different perspective, as many people do, coming up in the game and playing the game as much as many others have.
And for people that aren't as familiar with your work, in your articles as the beat writer, often have analytic stuff, which was, I think, probably how I first started reading your work. But also, you do, like you said, you're on Synergy, you do have videos in there quite a bit. Was that something that you were comfortable doing from the beginning, or has it evolved a little over time?
No, absolutely not. And it has sort of evolved over time. I mean, I think I've been known around here as sort of the analytics numbers guy for a while, but as I spoke about, I think I just sort of took an interest in that, and it was a deeper way to try to appreciate and understand the game, and especially when you can immerse yourself in one team. I mean, for Bill Self, he's running some plays that he's been running for a decade or more, and so you can sort of start to see patterns in games. You kind of, it's almost like chess, you know what I mean? You can start to appreciate the game at a different level. Or baseball, same thing. They always say, a lot of people, when you first watch baseball, it's boring, but the more you understand the game, the more you see the nuances that are happening in the game. And so I sort of started to take an interest in that. I think what's most important, though, is to know what you don't know. And I think that's something I've definitely learned over time. I don't want to overstep my boundaries in trying to describe what's happening. And again, I'm trying to learn more, and your videos help. I know I wrote something a couple weeks ago. It was funny. I was describing an inbounds play that KU runs, and usually they run it for a big man inside, and this time they ran it for a big guard in Quentin Grimes. I thought that was interesting. Like, hey, they got him a post-up attempt, and maybe they're going to do that more this year with a big guard instead of a big man. And a lot of people got back to me and said, hey, that action you're talking about, that's flex action. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's great. I appreciate you telling me that. But again, I'm trying to not go overboard with what I know about basketball, because I know I don't know everything about it. But then again, I'm trying to watch videos. I'm trying to learn more about the game, and and learning what a Spain pick and roll is, and trying to add that to what my knowledge is. But at the same time, there's also this, and I'm sure that, Jordan, you're starting to learn this as you get into writing and writing for an audience as well. The biggest key for me is trying to translate what I might know about the game to a casual fan in an easy to digest format. And so saying Spain pick and roll in an article is probably not going to help me out that much unless I have an explainer in there, or just go ahead and just explain what that is. And so I think that's the big challenge that you have, is you're not just speaking to people who know basketball. Well, you're speaking to a whole big audience. So trying to make sure that everybody can understand that and I digest that, I think that's kind of a big challenge, and something that I take pretty seriously, because I want people to be able to take in my article, whether they're new to the game or people that have watched the game for a long time.
From a behind the scenes perspective in all this stuff, I know it differs from program to program and coach to coach. Are you getting any behind the scenes X's and O's stuff in terms of access to the team that a regular fan isn't getting? Or is it literally just like what I do, just watching a game and developing opinions?
Yeah, honestly, not really. A couple years ago, KU was nice enough. They opened up a few practices to us, and so you can kind of take some details from that, just to know. For example, Bill Self, he has practices that don't have out of bounds. So if a guy throws a ball out of bounds, you could see two guys barreling at each other, shoulder to shoulder, towards the stands to go get that ball. And that's kind of how he tries to get toughness in their heads and basically develop a tough mindset with his team. So you can get things like that, but that hasn't happened for a couple of years. So a lot of it is, just I think it's sort of funny. I think I watch the game in a different way when it's actually happening, because I've got the ESPN feed on my computer, and I've got the headphones in listening to what Jay Billis is saying, or some of the TV reporters who have talked to the coaches and might pick up something there. And I'm trying to take screenshots. Usually the feed is about 30 seconds behind, so I'm shooting video during the game and screenshotting it, saving it for later so I can watch it over and over again. And I'm just trying to pick out little things that might interest me, or little things that happen in the course of a game we might forget. as the game goes on and as things happen later on. So really not as much as you would think. Like I said earlier, I have a lot of Bill Self videos from the past. There is camp videos of him out there and X and O's sheets. And again, a lot of that would make a lot more sense to you probably than me. But a lot of the coaching DVDs are really good resources, and you can get coaches in a pretty honest moment when they talk about what they're trying to do offensively and some of the things that they run. And so that's been helpful to look up at Bill Self offenses. And a lot of those things do not change that much over time when you're looking at what Bill Self is running at KU, especially when he's gone back this year to a lot of the two big stuff that they've run.
Right. So you mentioned the two big stuff, and I want to get into a little bit the dynamic between the beat writer and the head coach. I think it's especially interesting you covering Kansas because obviously Bill Self has had all the success by any objective measure. He's a great head coach, but he's doing some things that are a little suboptimal, at least from a modern analytics perspective. The two that you've written a ton about are post-ups and defending the three-point line. So first, can you kind of build what Bill Self's thoughts are on those two things?
Yeah, well, the three-point line is something that's been fascinating to watch over time because he was quoted, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, saying that with his offense, he thought that 30% of his team's shots from three was about the ideal number. And if you looked, you've written about this, Jordan, and did a great work on some of the graphs on this. I mean, it was clockwork. Every single year, 29%, 30%, 28%, 29%, 32%. I mean, it was 30% all along the line. And a couple years ago, when they didn't have the big men that they normally had, they created what's now known as the four game for them or four guard offense that they went to with all the outside shooters they had. And that number went way higher. And Bill Self completely transitioned what he thought about the 3-point shot to let his team and let his players have more freedom. And that's one of the reasons he's been a great coach. I mean, he is so good in game. He's so good with recruiting. But I'll tell you what, like for him to transition that quickly and cater himself to the pieces on his roster was a huge thing. And the biggest reason that KU made the Final Four last year, I mean, we all remember the example of KU versus Duke and Svi Mikhailuk, trying to take on post players inside and doing a good enough job, and KU spreading Duke out, a very talented Duke team to make the Final Four. But Bill Self basically created an offense, that 4-game offense. It's got some dribble weave to it and some rolling action, some pick and roll, that sort of stuff. And it's been great. It's been really successful for them. But as we know, this year they have more bigs, and they've got Dedrick Lawson and Udoka Azubuike, so they've kind of gone back to some of the old stuff that they run. And your second one was about post offense. I listened to your podcast with Gibson Piper a couple weeks ago, and I think Bill Self was like 5th or 6th on your list of coaches that you would draft. And one of the things I thought Gibson said that was interesting was Bill Self still has made the post up an effective shot even in today's game. And so when KU has had these two bigs in there, Dedrick Lawson is a very skilled passer for a big man, and Udoka Azubuike is just a huge, for people who don't know him, a 7-foot guy, about 275 pounds, can clear out a bunch of space. And so Bill Self has run different things to make sure that Dedrick Lawson is the passer and Udoka Azubuike is the catcher inside, and he can clear some space and get dunks. Where KU's run into some problems is that Udoka has taken on a huge usage rate this year, or he's been a bigger go-to guy than any player in the Bill Self era the last 10 years, the last decade, based on numbers. So he's really taken on a huge offensive role. And for this team, there's a lot of other talented players. You're not sure if you want him to take on that type of role when you have Dedrick Lawson or Quentin Grimes, who is a projected lottery pick, or Devon Dotson, who can get to the rim, or LaGerald Vick, who's been a crazy shooting guy this year from the outside, making about 60% of his threes. So when you have other talented pieces, you might want to get them involved a little bit more. And then also, KU has turned it over a lot to try to get the ball to Udoka, and Udoka's a really poor free throw shooter. He's made 8 of 25 free throws so far this year for 32%. So yes, when you can get a Udoka dunk, that's great offense, but there has been some downsides to trying to do that. So it's been fascinating. This last game against Wofford, Udoka went down with an injury. KU went back to its spaced out 4-guard offense, and almost in the second half, after a few minutes, went on a 27-0 run. So it'll be fascinating to sort of watch how KU evolves here and maybe goes back to some of its offense the last 2 years, because KU was playing primarily the post up, and that might change here with Udoka Azubuike out and Bill Self and his staff starting to see maybe what this team would look like with more of a small ball lineup.
So let's say, like you said, Azubuike's out. They're going to get a test run at this 4-guard lineup. Let's say it's really, really good, and objectively speaking, the points per possession are better during this course of the season without Azubuike. I'd assume you would probably write something about that. What's the line you walk there between, obviously Bill Self wants to play with two bigs, the high-low offense. What's the line between respecting that and my thought is that any beat writer wants to have a good relationship with the head coach, but also presenting the facts too.
Yeah, it's tricky sometimes because we're also not just talking about any coach here. We're talking about one who is an active coach in the Hall of Fame. I mean, how many of those are there out there? I mean, if you're talking about coaches, especially in college basketball, you probably can name them on one hand, and some of the ones that you would name would be like Coach K, Roy Williams, Jim Boeheim, some of the greatest names and coaches in the game. So, yeah, it's sort of interesting. Again, I think I go back to I think I've learned a lot over time on again, saying what you do know and then also being appreciative of what you don't know. And I think it's fine to have opinions. I think it's fine to bring up data and bring up numbers. But it's also fine to not always act like a know-it-all. You know what I mean? Because Bill Self is a smart guy too, and they're trying to win basketball games as well. When it comes to that in particular, that you spoke to it really well, Jordan. And this is something I try to keep in mind when I'm writing and thinking about things is when you do one thing, you're going to give up something else. And without Udoka Azubuike in the game, as Bill Self and their coaching staff knows, they are going to give up something defensively. One of the things you can control best, as Ken Pomeroy studies have shown, is your interior defense. And Udoka is a load inside. I mean, he can block shots, he can alter shots. He's not a great defensive rebounder, but we've seen from some tape that sometimes if you just box out your man, the other guy can get your other teammate can get the offensive or the defensive rebound, and that can help out your team. So even if KU's offense is great, that doesn't mean their defense is going to be great with this. So all these things are things you consider, and then at the same time, I think you just sort of get a feel too for the coach that you're working with and the team that you're working with. And I think one of those lessons I've learned is I know. For example, and this would be something I'd be interested to hear your take on, Jordan, since you've been part of a coaching staff, but the video is out there, and the motions that KU runs is stuff that Gibson Piper talks about on Half Court Hoops and has done videos on. So I don't think that's really a secret. But one of the things that can be a secret, and this is something I've learned over time, from talking to people, is the actual hand signals that go and take place with teams when they run a certain play. So there's been times in the past where I've written about the hand signal or the motion that KU has used to get into a set, and I think that's upset people because that's sort of been the code for them to get the play call out, and they felt like that has given their opponents an advantage to know that play call is coming, or that it's out there so that they can know that play call is coming if they're playing KU in future weeks. That's not something that would come to my mind, that they would go to Jesse Newell to try to get an advantage on KU playing them. I mean, you would think that there's lots of things going on that obviously they'd be worried about, but maybe that happens. And so I think I've taken that into consideration. And a lot of times in this job, you sort of pick the hill to die on. And when things are very important, you have to report on them. You do, because that's your job. But if it's a matter of me saying, hey, this is the hand signal that KU put with its play, or just simply describing the play and the action, I don't think my readers lose much by not giving the hand signal. So those are the sorts of things I think over time you just sort of get a feel for, and you also learn about the coaches that you're dealing with, and that sort of thing, and the mindset that they have with it. So it's sort of a fascinating process. But I guess I would throw it back to you, Jordan. Is that something that you, from a scouting standpoint, is that something you would look at particular plays? Because I'm truly am interested to know how other teams would scout other teams' actions and motions and plays, and if that's the sort of thing you would go looking for to see if a certain hand motion could give you guys a tip on what was coming.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that, specifically about the hand signals or the play calls. Every head coach is a little bit different. Some are pretty obsessed with trying to get every play call for sure. It's hard to do if you're not live scouting. So like during the WAC tournament, we were live basically where the media sits almost and getting stuff like that. During the regular season, it can be hard. But to go back a little bit more generally on this, actually, Eric Musselman, Coach Musselman at Nevada, one of the things that he requires of his assistant coaches is for them to be reading every article that comes out on the team. Okay. Especially in the summer, like you assistant coaches literally have a folder on their, everyone gets assigned scouts, and they literally have a folder of like beat writer articles. And Coach Muss himself definitely reads them too, almost to the point of obsession, I would say. But when I got to New Mexico State, it wasn't quite like that. But personally, I did still read quite a bit. I don't think like on its own you can learn a ton, but as you're watching so much film, there'll just be one little quote that a coach makes that like contextualizes what you just watched, basically like his thought process behind it. And it's been probably not huge, but it's solving a puzzle, I guess. And it's just more information and more information. And then I do think it's, being like nerdy is you just totally immerse yourself in it. There's probably just from a non-strategic point, you just are curious about what's going on with the program too. But there definitely are coaches reading beat writers for sure.
Yeah, and one thing I will say in general, I think the most important thing for coaches, I talked about giving away plays or that sort of thing in articles or maybe giving an advantage to another team. I would say overwhelmingly the biggest thing that coaches focus on when it comes to reading those articles too is recruiting. I mean, that's such just a big thing where you don't want to have a negative reputation, whether it's, hey, you don't shoot a lot of 3-pointers, and that might be read by a guard, or it might be read by somebody out there that says, hey, Kansas is a school that doesn't shoot threes, that sort of thing. So I think maybe overwhelmingly, at least from my experience, that might be more what coaches are worried about as a big picture perspective, but there definitely could be some of the other scouting part as well. And I guess you just never know what other people are going to read is the bottom line when it comes down to all this.
Right. Yeah. And then the other piece besides just the articles is also the press conferences too. You would be surprised. I've been in staff meetings where we were about to play a team the next day and we turn on the coach's show and just all listen around, see what he has to say about us, basically. So the media does play a big role in the day-to-day operations of college basketball for sure.
Well, and I'm glad you said that. It's all fascinating to me because this is all part of the side that I don't get to see and that I don't know is out there. So a lot of times we write stories and we send them out and we have no idea where they go and what places they reach. But I guess that is a fascinating subplot. You never know how much a team is sort of scouting an opponent and what all they're looking at. But that is a sort of interesting thing to know that coaches go to those lengths to try to get whatever edge they can.
Yep. And one more avenue, especially at New Mexico State, where the media coverage, it's decent, but it's definitely not up to Kansas's level. Message boards too. So I always thought that I personally read New Mexico State message boards, which probably most coaches wouldn't do. I always thought it was really, really cool that I could make a decision or at least be a small part of the decision in my role, and then like 10 minutes later, people are debating that decision. I didn't really I guess I didn't care necessarily on if they liked it or not, but just like there probably aren't too many professions like that where you're everything you do, like people care about. I always thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, there's the instant feedback out there for sure. And that goes for coaching as well as sports writing.
Yep.
You can definitely find it if you want to look for it. That's for sure.
So one article you've written this year that I want to focus on was called "The Secret is Out on KU's Defense." And in it was after the Louisiana game, and you had specific quotes from, which to me seemed a little bit unique, from Louisiana's head coach and players talking about their scouting report for Kansas that game. So I have two questions for you. First of all, why did they start talking about that? I'm assuming you played a role in gearing the conversation towards it. And then also, what did they say about Kansas?
Yeah, it was, I love these non-conference games because coaches, for good reason, especially in conference play, are pretty tight-lipped because you're going to play that team again and you're going to play that coach again and you might play them again twice in the conference tournament. So when Louisiana comes into Allen Fieldhouse and it's a bye game and they might not come back again, sometimes the lips are a little bit looser. But I mean, that's what we love. I love, when I can get honest quotes from people and not just sort of the canned responses. So Louisiana came in. They're our team that shoots a lot of threes, but in their game against Kansas, they shot 36 threes and 27 twos. And so that obviously was something that caught my attention. It's been something that KU has struggled to get out to shooters, especially guys that can stretch it from the 4 and 5 spots. People remember in the Final Four last year, if you watched the Villanova game, Villanova just blitzed Kansas with big men that can shoot from the outside and stepping even a step back and making threes over Kansas. And KU really couldn't adjust in time to that and lost pretty significantly in the Final Four. So, I asked the question. I just said, is that something you guys were trying to look to, or something you were trying to play to? And Bob Marlin, the coach for Louisiana, one of the most honest and open coaches that has been out there that we've had. But he said, we thought we could get that action. Basically, they were running a ball screen and then having the 4-man go kind of pick and pop, and they were getting that action every single time, and Udoka Azubuike was slow to recover, and they were getting open threes over and over again. And their 4-man was an okay three-point shooter, but I just thought it spoke to kind of a bigger general philosophy, which is, hey, if you're playing Kansas, you might not always play to your 4-man shooting a three, but in this instance, going inside is not going to be very effective probably, and you're probably not going to get many defensive rebounds because they're good at that too, so this might be your best course of action. And Bob Marlin just gave some great quotes about, hey, we thought we could get that action every time. We told our guys to run that. And then, Louisiana's players were saying that too. They were saying, they practiced that over and over again. One of the things in the game plan was to shoot a lot of threes. And so, you ask the questions. You hope you can get answers like that. But that's the sort of insight I hope to give. And again, hopefully going a step deeper in basketball into the analysis of it while also trying to make it accessible to everyone, so it's not something that people can't understand. I mean, this one was pretty evident. They were trying to play to their 4-man shooting threes, and this was something that KU hadn't shored up over its past 5 games. And in fact, in that last 5-game span when I wrote the article, teams had shot more threes against Kansas than twos. And so this wasn't a one-off thing. This wasn't hey, one team decided to do this in one particular game. This had become a pattern. And so just talking about that and talking with the other coach who was very insightful about what they did and what their game plan was, I thought it turned out to be pretty revealing into the mindset of another team going against Kansas, and something that KU will have to address and solve before the year ends, you would think, if they want their defense to improve to the level that they wanted to improve to.
How quickly does an article like that come to fruition? So I assume you have a deadline, right? It's like, what if I'm thinking about this as someone who's making content right now too. What if you don't get the quotes that you want from Louisiana? We just shot threes or something like that. How does that dynamic work for a beat writer?
Yeah, it's first thing, the Kansas City Star, I'm in a great position with them where we have 2 KU beat writers, Gary Bedore, who's amazing beat guy, has been on the beat for 30 plus years with the team, and so he knows KU in and out. And so he does like the game story and then a notebook if it's needed at the end of the game, which really allows me to kind of do an analysis type piece that's something a little bit different. And normally my deadline is just kind of when it finishes. I try not to abuse that, but I think it is really good when we're transitioning to more of an online world and when people are waking up the next day and wanting to read something more than just the facts of the game. I mean, a lot of people read the facts of the game. We can look at the numbers and I could tell you that too, but to kind of give something that's a little bit more offbeat and something that you couldn't have gotten just by watching the game. So I have that idea maybe going into it. I want to ask the players about that and see where it goes. And honestly, that you do the best that you can. If that was my thoughts during the game and what I thought I was going to be writing about and the quotes are really bad, I probably would have wrote about it anyway. And that's a little bit where when I'm talking about doing the video during the game and during the screenshots and being able to embed GIFs, the more this has gone on and kind of what the industry is turning to now, we spoke about access, and I think a lot of people out there probably assume that I get to go to multiple practices with the team a week or per month and those sorts of things, and that's not something that happens. And you get media access, before a game and after a game, those sorts of things. But I think a lot of what I try to do is to cater my job and the analysis I do to not rely on access, because sometimes it's not going to be there. And sometimes you won't be able to get the guy that you want to talk to after a game. And sometimes, the quote won't be there for the coach, or there's only so much time in a press conference setting. So I think when you do a little bit deeper dive and when you see things in real time and start to understand what's going on a little bit better, it helps you out. And then part of this is too that the Stars give me some freedom to have it be it a little bit of an opinion column. So if it's something that I believe in, I feel, or that the numbers back up, I'm a little bit more free to go out on a limb and say and state my opinion, which might not require as many quotes. So it's a long answer to your question, but it's a great opportunity that I have right now with the newspaper I'm with to do something that's pretty creative. And at the same time, sometimes you just got to write what you got to write. And if it's a boring game, you got to figure out what your angle is and go with it, and hope maybe if that's not your A+ effort, that your A effort comes out the next time you write.
From that Louisiana game, has there been any follow-up with Bill Self on that?
You mean me specifically, or just him talking about his 3-point defense?
Yeah, well, either.
No. A lot of these articles, I honestly don't know how KU consumes the articles that we all write. I'm with you in that I assume that somebody on their staff does read them and probably lets people know when relevant things come out that people need to know about. But that particular article, no, there hasn't been. To be honest, KU's perimeter defensive struggles are not exactly, I labeled as a secret in the article, but it hasn't really been a secret this year. So it's been a topic that a lot of people have broached, when it comes to this team. And to be frank with you, KU played Wofford here a couple days ago, and it was a little bit different than like a Louisiana, where the 4 and 5 men didn't shoot many threes. So it was probably a little bit of a better matchup for Kansas in that regard. But KU defended the 3-point line really well, and that was one of the main focuses. If you listen to some of the, to Bill Self before the game, or assistant coach Curtis Townsend, that they were really focusing to get guys a little bit further from the perimeter and make sure that they were bothered on the catch. So Wofford was 5 for 26 from 3. Fletcher McGee, who's one of the best 3-point shooters in the country, went 0 for 9, so one of his worst shooting performances. But no particular feedback from that particular article, but sometimes word makes its way back to you when you do write something, and that can be in the form of, a coach coming up to you and saying something and bringing up the topic with you, or getting around to you in some way. But the bottom line is you do your job the way that you think you can do it. And at this point, I sort of have a unique role to try to provide analysis in the best and most accurate way I feel it's possible. And sometimes that might lead to hearing about it from some people. But again, that's part of the job. And all you can do is just keep showing up every day and take your job very seriously, and hope that people respect what you do and respect that you're there every day, and that if there is a conversation that needs to take place, that you're there to have it.
The other article that I wanted to bring up was one where there was a follow-up with Bill Self later on. And that one was called How Frank Mason Ignored Bill Self and Helped KU to a Win Over TCU. Can you explain the background on that?
Yeah, the little bit of that one. Again, same thing. I was watching the game, had it pulled up on my computer, and there was a game-changing shot from Frank Mason. KU was up 6 late, but the momentum was kind of swinging TCU's way, and Bill Self called a play from the sideline, and basically I knew what was supposed to happen with that play, because I track some of KU's plays and keep them on a computer of mine, and just so I know from my own background. Again, I don't write about it specifically that often, but I know when KU does one thing, they're supposed to do another. So I noticed on that play that Frank Mason just didn't do what was being called out, and some of his teammates were motioning the same thing to him. He ended up driving, making a 2-pointer, and basically helping to win the game for Kansas. So I asked Frank after the game if he had ignored Bill Self. He said, well, not ignore, but I figured I could get by my guy and score. And so I ended up writing about that, and it was again a sort of column where I put my opinion into it and just said, hey, that it's sort of fascinating that Bill Self's a Hall of Fame coach. He calls a play, but sometimes players win you games, and this ended up being a good decision by Frank Mason to go kind of freelance and do his own sort of thing, and ended up winning an award in a national basketball writing contest. So I was proud of it, that I kind of noticed that thing on the fly during the course of a game that maybe some other people might not have noticed. But yeah, a press conference a couple weeks later, Bill Self mentioned he was asked about a certain play, and he said something to the effect of, well, Jesse's not going to write that Frank ignored me on this play. And so sometimes you get those sorts of things. I will say that in general, Bill Self is great when it comes to being sort of open with communication and grabbing you when he needs to away from folks and discussing things. And kind of like this conversation I had with you, Jordan, sometimes I learn a lot of things from the coaching side from him, what goes on there. And I think sometimes when I can explain what goes on from the journalism side, he can learn a little bit more about my role and understands a little bit more of what goes into the newspaper side of it. But yeah, sometimes that sort of stuff happens. That's sort of, you don't know what you write, what it's going to impact or how people are going to take it until a little bit after the fact. But I think that was sort of a fascinating one where that thing got mentioned a couple of weeks later when I wasn't expecting it. And Frank Mason probably didn't ignore Bill Self in that play, but he definitely freelanced on his own. And that was what led to the article, and that got brought up again. So it was sort of an interesting topic.
Yeah, and the fact that Bill Self brought it up 2 or 3 weeks later doesn't surprise me based off of coaches I've been around. But also my guess, and again, this is completely a guess. I don't know Bill Self at all, but my guess would be that he's reading more than he leads, or that you've been saying. Like I think that coaches are reading their articles about their team. That would be my guess.
Well, and that's the other thing. I mean, I mentioned earlier about doing the play call. I did very much talk about Bill Self scraping his forehead, and at one point scraping it so hard that he was pointing to his skull like, "Are you crazy, Frank Mason? What are you doing? Why are you not listening to me?" That sort of thing. So yeah, you live and learn over time. And I think on that one, since I didn't actually describe the play call they went to because Frank Mason didn't run that play call, that it was probably pretty harmless. But you do learn over time what goes on. And yeah, I think you probably know this as well as anybody, Jordan. Coaches will very much claim that they don't read, and I think there's an advantage to saying that you don't read the stuff because you don't want to give off the appearance that you're distracted by that or influenced by that. But at the very bare minimum, they are aware or made aware by people what is being said out there and told when there's things that they should know about. So I think that is the base level of what's going on here, and you could probably speak to that as well.
Yeah, the other thing we haven't talked about that just reminded me of is like bulletin board material or locker room material.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is real too. Like that's it probably now gets projected onto a screen. It might not be a bulletin board anymore, but a motivational tactics based on what anybody wrote. It could be anyone, and a beat writer, the other team's beat writer, whoever. That those get put up before games, before practices, for sure.
Well, and actually one of the best things, you talk about your work and you're not sure where it's going. What was something that's really cool to me, I try to do before every game. It's called what I call the quick scout. But basically I do a really quick scouting report on the opponent and then give a win projection or a prediction for my own thoughts on what the game is. And Oakland's coach, I'll have to look up his name, but he's been pretty analytically savvy over time. He went on the pregame show with KU basketball last year, and he referenced the scouting report that I wrote on his team. And so sometimes I wonder too, because, I try to give some pluses and minuses of these players based just strictly off the stats and the synergy stuff. But I could certainly imagine at some point in time, especially if he read that, he probably brought to Oakland's best player. It would have been Greg Campy. You bring it to Oakland's best player and said, this guy says you can't shoot from three, or this guy says you can't defend post-ups, that sort of thing. So that sort of thing is really cool for me because you don't know who's reading or who's reading what, but it is fascinating, at least when you can hear, or like I said earlier in your example, Jordan, when people are out there and in the coaching industry and you know that they're at least taking a look at this stuff and reading it, whether they agree with it or not, that's always kind of a cool thrill when we know that people are actually are examining the stuff that you're writing and thinking about what's in there.
I can give you an example. We had at Nevada, I had Jordan Caroline on the podcast actually, and our beat writer at the time, Chris Murray, did a little like slideshow online where he wrote about every single player on the team. And Jordan Caroline and Leland King were both like kind of the same position sitting out, and he wrote about Leland King. He had good things to say, but he said in it, the quote was "not an elite athlete," and like Leland literally always says all the time that he's an elite athlete. So it was pretty funny that it said "not an elite athlete." And then the next on the slideshow, the next over was Jordan Caroline, and it was, now we're talking. This guy is an elite athlete. and so the first thing I do is show it to them, and it became like a running joke, that they use that. So I was showing it to the players, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's great stuff, and I'm sure that would motivate those guys to try to one up each other the rest of the season. There's no doubt about that.
Yes, yeah. So the last piece to all this that I want to get into is how the national guys and their relationship with the head coach differs from beat writers.
Yeah, it's just different, and I think a lot of that is what they're going to want from coaches is going to be different from what we have to produce with coaches. Obviously, we're here with the team, and we're going to write 4 or 5 times a week on the team and the in and outs. And, we'll be asking Bill Self today at the press conference an update on Udoka Azubuike, and we'll have to bug him about that for, the next few weeks, almost every single time, which, can get annoying to both parties, I'm sure. Us asking it and then Bill Self having to answer it, but it's relevant, and it's what fans want to know about. From a national perspective, you're looking more at either a big feature that you're going to write, or more often than not, just sort of the scoops is what I would call it. If there's big breaking news, or if something happens and you want to get this coach on the record, or to get the tweet out first, or to have the breaking news on whatever the site may be, that's what those guys are going to do. But yes, it is a very different relationship when you're talking about a national guy, and part of that is because part of their job is to get in with these coaches and to make sure that they are liked and respected. And I'm not saying anybody's doing anything wrong. It's kind of the nature of the beast. A pretty good example of that a few years ago. Bill Self was really generous. I wrote a story about him and his upbringing in Oklahoma, and his parents and his father, who actually has a quote that Bill Self had put just outside the Naismith statue at the National the Basketball Hall of Fame. So it's he very much respects his dad. So anyway, I was at the Speak Apple Journal. I was writing a story on his dad, and I wanted to get his parents' number. I wanted to go and try to meet with them before a game that KU played down in Oklahoma, go meet at their house. And so I decided at the football game, Bill Self has a suite, a couple, a little bit down from the press box. I decided to go in there and ask Bill Self for his, get a couple numbers for him for the story. And he was great. He said, yeah, sure. Hey, do you want to grab a bite to eat or whatever? But he gave me the numbers, all those sorts of things. But I did notice in there was a national writer who was, in the booth with him, in the suite with him, and was, drinking some beverages with Bill Self at this football game, So I was just sitting there thinking, wow, that's not something that would probably ever happen at a local level, and that's something you wouldn't want to have happen. And then after the fact, it was brought up to me a couple of times in very matter-of-fact terms that I should not be going, whatever the circumstances are, to Bill Self's suite during football games, even if I was going there to, get phone numbers or whatever, that I was basically just not allowed there. So I think that's probably a pretty accurate example of sort of what can be the difference between local and national media. And part of that is some of the things we spoke about earlier and what my job is, and that sometimes that is going to require me to say critical things. And that sometimes it's going to require me to write stories that are uncomfortable for Kansas athletics, but I mean, that's what I signed up for, and that's what the nature of the job is. When you're a national writer, I think it's just a little bit different, that there's a little bit more of a give and take there, and it depends on the person, obviously. I'm not painting all with a broad brush here, but a lot of that is going to be ingratiating yourself with the coach and trying to make sure that when you give them a phone call, and this is important as local beat writer too, that they pick up that phone call and can give you the information that you need. So there is very much a different sort of job there from the way I perceive it. But that doesn't mean one is right and one is wrong. It just means that all of us are kind of working our best to do what we can to be the most effective at the job that we have.
And it sounds like, from what you said earlier, that having the analytics or the X's and O's scouting angle enables you to maybe not be so dependent and to have something to say even without needing direct contact, right?
Well, absolutely. And listen, it's important for us at the Kansas City Star to have contacts and to be able to call up KU officials or coaches, at certain times when it's needed. So that's absolutely the case. But yes, I mean, in my particular spot, when there is less and less access, and maybe when we can talk about the glory days 30 years ago where the reporters were right next to the team on the floor with the seats. And listen, I'm this is not a complaint. Let me be very, very clear here. Courtside seats are going to fans, and they should. I mean, that should be part of the fan experience. And if KU can make a boatload of money off of that, that's exactly what KU should do. And so that's what's happening. But again, it's kind of forcing me into a different direction where it's like, can I sort of be self-sufficient here? Can I do things that I won't be reliant on others to have the type of analysis and the type of stories that I like to write and I feel like could be good for other people to read about. So for me, that's sort of the approach that I've taken here, especially over the course of the last few years as media policies and approaches have changed. And to be completely honest with you, one of the main competitors we have right now, whether it's spoken or unspoken, is that all these athletic departments have their own Twitter accounts and Snapchat accounts. And, you're going into a new age of media. I mean, when KU announced its football hire here a couple weeks ago with Les Miles, the way they announced that, they sent out an email to donors first. I mean, they're not, the release is going to the fans before it's going to the media. So there's all sorts of different things that are going on with media nowadays that maybe wasn't the case 20, 30 years ago. But the bottom line is you just try your best to do what you do best and to accentuate your strengths and to do work that's interesting and you think that people might read. And so the data, the analysis, the Ken Palms, the synergies, all those sorts of underlying things that maybe can provide an insight into what these guys are doing on the court and how they're winning basketball games. I think that's really what I am very much attracted to and what I hope people can take from my work as well.
Yeah, thank you for all your perspective on that. I don't know how much people think about the relationship between the coach and the beat writer, but it's definitely there. One more thing before I let you go, I have to at least bring it up. What have your Twitter mentions been like with your AP ballot, Duke being number one?
We talked about earlier, social media being there when you want it. I have heard from a lot of people. Let's just say that. The Gonzaga fans are not my biggest fans right now, but we could get into a long conversation about that. But the bottom line is, some of the measures out there, the Ken Palms, the Bart Torviks that look at every possession and schedule adjusted every possession, they would tell us that Duke is the best team in the country based off what we've seen so far, even though they lost a game to Gonzaga on a neutral court. My argument would be that head-to-head is not that reliable. Sometimes crazy things happen. Sometimes in a one-game sample that we don't always see what we would expect. And even then, a 2-point loss on a neutral court is not that bad for Duke. So, but yeah, it has been pretty crazy. I had somebody, it was sort of funny, a Gonzaga fan last night come at me on Twitter and say, hey, Duke was favored by 37 and they're only up by 5 at halftime. How do you feel about your vote now? And Duke won by 30, just for everybody out there checking. So, yeah, it's sort of funny to get those interactions. But I don't mind speaking about what my thoughts are, and I like the discussion about it. I'm happy to talk about a deeper thinking when it comes to ranking teams, but sometimes the people out there are not into wanting to have a debate. They're just out to call you names. So that comes with it too, but I'm happy to have a discussion. I'm happy to present a different way of thinking about college basketball.
My favorite, when I was doing some research for this, I saw some of the mentions, and everyone says the results have to matter, and then immediately you say, "Yeah, well, I'm looking at every possession." Right? It seems like that was like 90% of the debate. I feel like.
Well, listen, it's Jordan. In a perfect world, when you have a playoff game between two teams in the finals, you would want the best team to win 100% of the time. That's just not reality. Like, I would love to perpetuate that fairy tale. That's just not how it works. It's not how games work, sports work. It's not how life works. And so I think if we can give a better thought process on this, like, hey, why do NBA teams play 7-game series? So hopefully the best team wins, or that you provide a bigger sample so that the best team will have a better chance of winning out over time. And college basketball is just different. You play March Madness, and the top teams that KU is remembered for are those teams that win 4 or 5 or 6 straight games in March. And sometimes that's unfortunate. They've had great teams in the past that have faltered in games where they shouldn't have, but it's a 1-game sample. And sometimes you struggle in that, and sometimes things don't go your way and the ball doesn't bounce your way, and crazy things outside your control happen. So hopefully I'm getting some people on my bandwagon here, but based off my Twitter mentions, I think I have a long road to go.
Yeah. That's an uphill battle for sure. I mean, I agree with it, but definitely an uphill battle.
I think some of my other fellow media members, from conversations from them, they've told me, I agree with you, but there's no way I'm voting that way. I'm not fighting that battle every single day. So for at least right now, that's the cross I have to bear.
Got it. Well, thank you again so much for your time. I know that you have a Bill Self press conference to get to later today, so I'll keep reading all the cool quotes, analytics, and film that you have out there on Kansas. And yeah, thank you again, Jesse.
Hey, I appreciate it, Jordan. Thanks.
No hand checking Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Tony Kukoc.